All right, the respiratory system. Let's go into the details from the gross anatomy, the microanatomy, and the functional anatomy, which leads us to the physiology of what exactly is going on the cellular level. Brought to you by Curious Marineland. So what we have is, I'm going to do a couple different slides, and I'm timing this so I don't make this too long. So we'll get into the overview of the functional anatomy. We'll talk about the mucosa, we'll talk about membranes, and then we'll end up doing this. We'll finish by talking about the respiratory tract, going from, say, start with the trachea and go all the way down to the alveolus. Now, one of the things that you're going to see here, and if you're my students, we covered this in class, and I'm going to talk briefly about this. If you were to say 5 functions of the structures that you see from going in here to gas exchange to the membranes outside. So we're going to talk about the large surface area, the passageway of air. Here's the passageway of air, and that's really what this video will focus on. I'm not going to talk about olfaction and vocalization, but they play a role, and then of course protection, your first line of defense. And if you're one of my students, we've already listed this and we gave information, so I'm going to do this quickly. So these numbers correspond. So the large surface area, that's where your gas exchange is going to be. We're talking about air and circulating with the blood. Okay. Number 2 is moving the air from the outside to the gas exchange surfaces. That's what we say. There's a passageway. Okay. Then protection. All right. Protecting you from dehydration, temperature changes, pathogens. The next slide, I'm going to elaborate on these 3. Now, large surface area for gas exchange, passageway, so here's the passageway of air, and then the exchange with the blood, and picking up oxygen and or dumping off oxygen, picking up carbon dioxide. So dehydration, temperature change, invaders, that's pathogens, that's viruses, fungus, bacteria. This could be or parasites, any microscopic animals. Now make a note, these 2 right here, they are not part of the respiratory system, but they are kind of entrenched with them, so you can have olfaction, which is smelling, and vocalization. So the respiratory system aids in smell and communication, speech. All right, so let's go into these structures, starting with the nasal cavity, going all the way to the alveoli. I would do that, but I think we need to talk about some of the micro parts. So let's also identify really what is going on here. We have 2 major areas, the conduction zone and the respiratory portion, or the conduction portion. So the respiratory tract, so the nasal cavity, the large bronchioles, this is where you're going to filter and warm, humidify, preventing dehydration. And then it's lined with respiratory mucosa that has cilia, pseudostratified ciliated columnar cells. Okay, then we got to review your histology. Then the small bronchioles, and this is where the actual bronchioles. So this is where the actual gas exchange, where oxygen is being dropped off and carbon dioxide is being picked up, and then we got to link this to the circulatory system. If you're thinking functional anatomy, think about your pulmonary arteries, and then your pulmonary veins are taking back that oxygenated blood to the heart, where it gets distributed to the body. Okay, and that's kind of what this is showing. So imagine some air's going in and ultimately down to here. So I'm going to finish by walking through, starting the trachea, and number this. And so what we see here, so this is the respiratory tract. The upper respiratory tract is basically from the nasal down to the trachea, and then you got the bronchus, and then you got the lower respiratories where the actual gas exchange ultimately will happen. And we got a lot to talk about with those. So let's so there's another way of looking at it. Here's the bronchi, or bronchus, bronchioles, and then you get to the actual follow airs going in here, and then ultimately here. So I'm going to come back to those, but let's look at, we said the conduction zone, the respiratory zone. Let's briefly stop and talk about membranes before we talk about from trachea down to the alveoli. Okay, so this is a mucous membrane. All right, what is it when we say mucous membrane? It is open to the outside versus a serous membrane, Now the problem is we have this term called mucosa and stuff. So imagine here, these membranes here, they're lining, they're not connected to the outside. They're serous membrane. But the mucous membrane is this. Follow. That's a mucus lined membrane. It is open to the outside. So that's a review of your histology. Now if we were to zoom in at any point, we could do a cross section and look at the cells here. So here's your ciliated columnar or cells, and you got stem cells, you've got so you got mucus that's being secreted by these goblet cells, and then mucus gets released, and you're going to see this all through here because it's open to the outside. So this is the outside right here. This would be the muscle layers, the lamina propria. You got your stratified, you got your epithelia cells here, and they're releasing. Remember, epithelia is the lining to the outside. And just to look at the serous membranes, this is where we bring back parietal and visceral. Okay. Now, I'm going to show you, this is the pericardium, that's the heart, but then here it's called pleura. Anything that's pleura is representing the lungs. Here's another view. All right, so we're looking here. Now we're looking at the membranes around. They're not open to the outside, and that's why they're called serous membranes. And so the trachea, air going here, that's mucous membrane versus serous membrane over here. And let's zoom in here. If we look at here, here's the lung. Right here are two membranes. We have the one that's covering the lungs, that's going to be your visceral. And then the one that's outside will be your parietal. Let's see if we have this here. We've labeled it here. So your pleural, this is the cavity. See the parietal pleura, and then the visceral pleura. The visceral is actually touching here. And now it's labeled in blue and red here. So in this case, the visceral is right here. Here's the parietal. This is the inner one. This is the outer one. So that's the lining of the lungs. Now let's talk mucosa as we go here. So this is just another view. Again, you can see your parietal, the outer, and then your visceral, which is the inner. These are all good pictures. My students should be able to recognize this and be able to identify them. All right, so let's follow. Air's going in and down here. Notice I didn't go here. That's the esophagus. Fortunately, we got the structure called the epiglottis. Now, I'm going to do another video that goes into greater details of this. If you're one of my students, this is a good picture. I like this picture. I guarantee you'll see it again. All right, so let's do this. So I'm going to pause for a second, and let's think about air going in and going all the way to the lungs, to this micro part where we're talking about where the gas exchange occurs. Okay, I was going to show a model, but I think I'm just going to go back to the PowerPoint. All right, so let's watch this. So air going in, and we're going to really focus on the trachea, but so again, air, you're talking about air going in, all right, and you got this, we're down in the trachea, going here, going in this direction. Well, what happens next? So we need to label some things. So the first thing would be the trachea. Once it branches off, they're called bronchus. So let's look at here. So we're actually going to start here, talk about these 3-4 things, and we'll just close up this video. So here we go. Trachea. So there's the air. Once it splits here, we see the bronchus. So what I've done is I've just numbered these. I'm going to do it in steps. So, and then we're going to zoom in and actually see the smallest part. So let's go here and remind ourselves we have the conduction portion and the respiratory. So the conduction portion is going to be the nasal cavity and the larger bronchioles. And then once we get to the smaller bronchioles and the alveoli, we're in what's called the respiratory portion. So I'll keep mentioning it. So, all right, conduction. Let's talk. We're in the conduction zone, the trachea. Then we have the main bronchus, so it splits up to here. People will often call this the primary bronchus. Now notice here, secondary. So let's follow here, here, and I numbered it on both sides. Here is, let's move me over here. Now let's look at the next. We'll go through 3 and 4, the secondary bronchus. So again, I'm drawing in here. here, secondary bronchus, and now watch. 1, 2, 3, tertiary bronchi, or bronchus. All right, bronchus. Two. If I said the two together, I'd say bronchi. But remember, you have a left and a right. The moment you split into primary, you are going into the left and right lobes of the lungs. Okay. Now, what I've labeled is 5 and 6. So we have, again, air, primary, then secondary, then tertiary, and then we're here. We're at bronchioles, labeled on both sides, and then we're going to get to what's called a terminal bronchiole. We're still at the conduction zone, but we are. So now we're here. So look at I've labeled number 6 in the previous slide. Oops. There's 6. It repeats here. Now let's just kind of finish this up with 7 is the respiratory bronchiole. Once we're here, we're in the respiratory portion versus the conduction. So the air is going here. So let's follow this air going here. Now look at number 8. That's this right here. Now, what's the difference between terminal bronchiole and alveolar duct? The alveolar duct has the alveoli attached to it. Now, if you do a cross section, so let's do a section here and cut this, move here, you'll see there's number 8, the alveolar duct, and then so air is going here. And as it's doing, it's eventually going to each one of these, which is, we call the alveoli the plural, the singular would be the alveolus. So alveolus. So if we were to say 6, let's go back up to here, 1 through 6, now we're down at 7, 8, 9, and then ultimately we're at 10, which is the alveolus. Now, if we were to zoom in here, I didn't number this, but this, so here's number 10, the alveolus. It's going to interact with right here, it's actually called a endothelium, and you'll see that part right here. These epithelial cells, these are epithelial cells. You can look through and identify squamous epithelial cell walls, and then they fuse to make this little membrane here, and it's called a basement membrane. And here is a red blood cell. There's the capillary. So what's the red blood cell going to do? It's going to drop off carbon dioxide, pick up oxygen with its hemoglobin, go back to that video, and this is going to go, where are we right now? We're in the alveoli. So this is going to finish up doing this. So let's watch. So the oxygen's coming in, and where's that carbon dioxide that's being dropped off? So the carbon dioxide is being dropped off, oxygen is being picked up. This is actually the internal respiration. External respiration would be from the air down to ultimately this. And ultimately, this carbon dioxide came from cellular respiration. So this would be CR, cellular respiration. This is all the tissue that's requiring oxygen. They're dropping it off, and they're returning. And this all, the gas exchange is happening in these little alveoli. All right, so I'm going to finish up this video by pointing out this. All right, we've got, here we've done this, and then we're down to the bronchioles, the terminal bronchiole, and then you have the alveolar duct, and you have the alveoli, and here's another, this is a little more detailed video. You'll definitely see this in a future video. So, and yes, this is stuff that we need to be able to identify, the functional anatomy, and then we're going to get into the physiology of the gas exchange. All right, that's pretty much it. Brought to you by Curious Marineland. All right, so if you're one of my students, I would definitely look over this video. I'd pause and compare. With some of this is notes we've done in class. Some of this is notes we'll do next class period.